Okay, so what we're going to try and do this morning is just a little bit of working with highlights and shadows. So thankfully you don't have to look at my ugly mug because I've positioned the camera on the model instead. So what I've got is a front end of a Land Rover Forward Control 101. So this is a kit form services kit, resin multimedia in 1/24 scale. So as you can see, it's quite nicely detailed. Injection molded resin, so not much cleaning up needed. Goes together really well. So the 101 is a British Army vehicle. It's now out of service, but was used quite a lot for towing artillery with. It's general service, ambulance, radio versions. So in line with a lot of post-war British Army stuff, it's got a disruptive camouflage of the infrared, reflective green and black in the disruptive pattern. And what it should look like is one of those. There, see? So what we've got to do today is try and get those colours as close as possible to what we've got in that photo. So we're going to try and add a bit of highlights, a bit of shadows, try and add a bit of disruptive wear, random patterns, that sort of stuff onto it. What I want to try and show you is some of putting highlights onto the green and maybe try and get some of the shadows on as well. Okay, so we've done the initial base coat and we used some Tamiya acrylics for that. So we've used a field grey, which goes on really well and it's quite nice because the infrared reflective green tends to go to a sort of very greyish greenish hue as it wears and as it starts to oxidise on the surface of the paint. And then just to get a nice bit of contrast, we've gone with a black, just a straight Tamiya flat black, sprayed on freehand, quite well thinned to start putting that camouflage pattern on. Normally you'd probably want to go with a grey, but to get the contrast we've gone black first, and what we're going to do then is follow it with some highlights in grey, just to add some wear and some disruption, oxidisation to the paint. So when we look at it, there's different ways of approaching how you put your highlights on. You can either sort of work from the approach of just being a random pattern to disrupt the paint on it, or you can go on the approach that there's light, say, coming from a particular angle. So sometimes on my models I'll say the light's coming from one corner, so we'll put the highlights on it and we'll spread them out from a point. So it'll be lightest there, then darkest on either side, which would be in the shadows away from your source of light, so point the source of light. That's probably what we're going to do here. But we'll think about more of it when we put on the rest of the model. Normally what you do is just do the complete model together, so you can make sure it all beds in and all ties in together, so you haven't got strange contradictions almost in where your shadows and your highlights are. Anyway, so to make a start, so normally what you want to try and do is work out where, you know, what your highlight tone is and what your shadow tone is. Because I've done a few in this colour scheme now, what I tend to do is a tried and practice sort of tried and tested routine. For the green is to use Tamiya field grey, then use some highlights in the life colour field grey, which is it's lighter, but it kind of automatically looks like a highlight of that colour without having to do any mixing or shading. And then for my shadows, what I tend to use is Tamiya dark green, so it's quite green, but when it goes on thinned, it will look more like a shadow. So we'll concentrate that around things like bulks and where we think the shadows are going to be on that cab. So that just makes life easier. If it was something that we hadn't done before, then we'd probably mix that with a bit of white and a bit of cream, possibly a bit of red. The thing you've got to think about is what colour the paint goes to as it wears and as it oxidises. So sometimes if you just add white to it, it's going to go too grey, it's not going to look realistic, it's going to wash the model out. So sometimes you need to think about adding things like pink tones almost, or yellow tones to it, just to try and make that wear colour look a bit more interesting. And a lot of it's by eye, so it's just what looks good to the eye. Of course there's a big debate as to what's actually realistic, and that's where it's a trade-off between the art and the modelling. Anyway, so we've got some thinned life colour field grey in the airbrush, and that's ready to go. So let's do a quick test, make sure we're okay. Yeah, so we've got it quite turned down on the air pressure, so nothing too bad. So when we're looking at it, it's pretty reasonable to assume the light's going to be coming somewhere at the top. So we're going to concentrate the highlights around raised surfaces around the top of that bulkhead panel there, and we're probably going to blend it down a little bit. We're also going to probably try and cut in the camouflage a little bit. Similarly on the doors as well, we're going to probably do the top of the door and blend it down and see if you've got the highlight running down at the shadow. So we'll make a start on the top. Start the airbrush off before you get on the model, so you don't get the paint splatter. And we're just going to work that highlight in there. Give it a bit more paint. Start blending it across. Particularly on this top surface here, where we think the light's going to be hitting it, it's going to be fading the paint out. There we go. It's coming quite nice. We're going to get a bit of over splatter, but we'll tidy that up later. There we go, and then we're just going to try and cut that down there a bit. Now coming across over to the doors. Sometimes I'll take the cap off so I can give the needle a quick wipe if it's starting to clog a little bit with acrylics, because acrylics dry very quickly. Just checking the body of the paint there. So there we go, so we're just going to carry on doing what we're doing. So the approach that you can take is to do all the highlights and all the shadows for your first colour first, and then spray the camouflage on the top, but then you tend to find that as a result you'll duplicate the work you're doing because you have to add them in again afterwards. So sometimes I find it's easier just to do it all at once. There we go. And then this side of course is going to be in the shadow, so it's going to, we don't really want to go quite as crazy there, so we'll just put a hint of it on, the gentle hint of it being slightly different. There we go. What we'll probably do is concentrate the shadows a bit more on the side. So you can see the paint's getting a bit grainy there, where it's starting to dry a little bit, so it's not quite as well thin for what we're doing. But you're always trying to get a trade-off between how thin the paint is versus how thick it is, so that you don't get it just going on too light, so it just washes out all over the model. So we'll just put a bit more on here now on this top surface, just to build up that highlight, so it's more distinct. As you can see, now you've got the blend down from the highlight into a mid-tone, and the same there as well, you've got the mid-tone on the door. So what we're going to do now is quickly wash the airbrush out, and then we're going to go and spray some shadows in there as well, so we've got that contrast between the two. Just giving it a quick wash, so put the cap back on again, get the cotton bud, give it a quick blow back, there we go, out the way of the model so we don't get splatter all over it. Just clean the cup out. Of course really we should be wearing a mask for this, but if I put my mask on you won't hear me talking, although in some ways that might be an improvement anyway. Right, so airbrush is, you know, pretty clean for what we want to do now, so we're just going to give it a quick wipe out with the cotton bud. So now we need to mix up our shadow tone. So right, so we'll get our a dark green. There we go. Give it a quick shake. This is where it's a bit of trial and error. So you want the paint very nice and thin so you can get streaks on and like build up your shadows. But you don't want it too thin, or else you'll find the paint just balloons out when you spray it on. So we're probably going to go on the idea of, say, so that's one brush full of paint, get the thinners in. The normal rule is that you try and get it so that it drops freely off the brush, so you probably want to go a little bit more than that, so you know it's going to be thin enough to spray on, and very, very fine lines. So you want to be less than a millimetre thick really on your lines. So what you sometimes might be worth doing is mixing it up, having a quick spray with it to see if it's quite as thin as you want, so it doesn't splatter, it doesn't run. Then once you think you're around about there, go in with it. Right, so I think that's probably about right now. So you can, if you see there, that's very thin, drops relatively freely off the brush. So get our airbrush. We're just going to do a quick trial run, so we'll put a couple of drops in first, see how it looks. Put the cap on so we don't spill it all over the workbench. There we go. Right, okay, so I'm going to turn the air pressure right down. You see I've got this needle valve on the airbrush, so we turn that down right down low. I'll take the cap off, and then we're just going to have a quick test run, see if it's about as low as I want it to be. Yeah, that seems about right. So what we want to do is pick out some detail, like maybe some rivet heads, and just come in gently, ease back on the trigger so you start pulling the paint through, and gradually you'll see it coming through. There we go, first one nearly done. Move on to the second one. Here we go, drop the air pressure down a little bit. There we go. Just start as if you're drawing around the rivet detail. Nice and gently does it. Same around here as well. There we go. Just pull it round. We'll go across the top. And get the shadow around the bottom of the cranking handle. There we go. And then the bottom of the pickaxe handle, just a little bit of a hint of a shadow around there. And what we want to do at the bottom, just on the bottom of this bulkhead here, so think about where the shadow is going to be coming up from. And go a bit heavy around here, and if you've got your paint nice and light, what you can do is start building up like a shadow effect with just gentle coats of your shadow colour. Of course you don't really want that white tack there, but you can fix that later, but just gently blow it on and you see it gradually darkening the base colour. Then you can drift that up. Yeah, we're slowly starting to make that bottom of that colour, that bulkhead, just that little bit darker. Yeah, and shift that up a little bit. So then moving across onto the top. Gently does it. Along that seam there, we're going to probably in real life collect a bit of grime in there, so we'll just put a little bit of a suggestion of a shadow along there, and we're probably going to put some around the fire extinguisher as well. There we go, and then carry it on. A little bit there where the windscreen wiper will come out. A bit of a steady hand for that bit. And then we're probably going to put a little bit underneath where that spade is as well. Just darken it down a little bit. So again, just nice and gently, just build it up in a coat. So it's just a suggestion there of a shadow. And then a couple of nuts on the top there as well. So we're going to do those. Just trying to think about where you're going to get a natural shadow, but also where you might get grime collecting and things like that. There we go, then those two. And then of course what you can do afterwards is pick out those bolt heads with like a lighter coloured paint, and the detail will just pop out then. Is it totally realistic? Probably not. Does it make the model look good? It's the eye of the beholder, but it depends what you want really. I like this way of working. It's often referred to as post shading, as opposed to pre-shading where you do this beforehand then build up coats of colour on the top. So you can see, so we're just starting to get those highlights showing, so it's just making it look like it's worn a little bit. Yeah. And so from your side as well, you've got to make sure when you look down on the model that it all ties up from different directions. So we're just going to gently put like a hint of a shadow around there and then around, just around that spade as well. There we go. Now here's our door, so what we'll probably do is along the bottom of the door we're just going to try and build up a hint of a shadow there. And you see it's just very, very light, it's changing that ever so slightly the colour. And what you can do of course is just come carefully on the bottom of that door as well. Ever so slight. There we go, see, ever so slight. And then what we'll do here is around there we'll just pick out these bolts, rivets in the door skin. If you ain't sure, come off the model, get the paint blowing and then come back on again. Just work your way down nice and easy, all the time in the world. There we go. Of course you could blow inside there as well if you wanted to put some more detail into that. Okay, and then round on the door. This is, of course, this is our shadow door. It's in the shadow, it's going to be beside the light. So we can use this shadow mix, just blow it up the door, nice and steady, nice and easy. There we go. Okay, and then we'll forget about the heads again. If you wanted to, you could pull down on the airbrush and put like a streak in there, like that, just streak it off, and that works quite well. But sometimes it's easier to do that using oil colours. I just put a spot of oil colour on it, and then use a damp brush, just pull it down. You get a bit more control then, the line's a lot thinner. There we are. So you can go all the way along there if you want. See, there's that line across the trim at the top. Yeah, okay, so that's not looking too bad now, so we'll probably give it a breather. Don't want to go too crazy. Of course the other thing you have to bear in mind as well is that the moment you put your gloss varnish on, it's going to really tone down the difference between those different colours and different shadows and different highlights, and so to some extent if it looks a bit stark at this point it will probably blend in. And then of course when we put our highlights out, pick out the bolt heads and stuff like that, that'll look a bit better as well. Okay, there we go. Hope it was useful.